never thought silence could last 12 years. At first it felt temporary, like a misunderstanding that would eventually soften with time. I was already in my early 50s when it began. Old enough to know life was fragile, but still young enough to believe blood relationships always found their way back. I was wrong. It started quietly. One missed invitation, then another. Weddings happened without me. Birthdays passed with no calls. Family gatherings came and went, and I only heard about them later through distant relatives or social media photos that felt like knives. At first, I made excuses for them. Everyone is busy, I told myself. Life gets complicated. I kept calling, kept sending messages, kept showing interest. Most of the time, I got silence in return. The truth is painful to admit even now. Back then, I had nothing they considered impressive. I was a widow living modestly, working long hours, saving slowly. I didn't have fancy clothes or a big house to host people in. I wasn't useful to their image. And slowly, invisibly, I faded out of their lives. After a few years, the calls stopped coming from my side too. Not because I didn't care, but because rejection becomes heavy when you carry it alone for too long. I focused on surviving, on paying bills, on keeping myself together. Nights were the hardest. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, wondering how family could forget someone so completely. I blamed myself more times than I can count. Still, I didn't become bitter. I became quiet. I worked, I saved, I sacrificed small comforts for a future I couldn't yet imagine. While others traveled or spent freely, I stayed disciplined. I learned new skills even when my back ached and my eyes tired easily. I told myself that independence was my only real security. And slowly, almost without realizing it, my life began to change. By the time I turned 62, I had achieved something I once believed was impossible. I bought a beautiful house. Not just any house, a large, elegant home in a peaceful area. People called it luxury, though to me it was simply proof that I had survived. Every wall carried my effort. Every room echoed with resilience. I remember the first night I slept there. The house was quiet, but it wasn't lonely. It felt respectful. It felt earned. I didn't announce it to anyone. I didn't post pictures or send messages. I moved in quietly, just as I had lived most of my life. I thought that chapter of family disappointment was behind me. I was wrong again. One afternoon, just a few months after settling in, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I froze. Faces I hadn't seen in over a decade stood there, smiling widely, arms open as if no time had passed at all. Relatives who hadn't attended my hardest years now stood in my doorway, eyes drifting past me, taking in the high ceilings, the polished floors, the expensive decor. "Oh, so this is where you live now," one of them said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. In that moment, 12 years came crashing back into my chest. Every ignored call, every lonely holiday, every tear swallowed quietly. And suddenly they were here, comfortable, curious, impressed. They talked loudly, laughed easily, asked questions about the house, the neighborhood, the cost. Not one of them asked how I had been all those years. Not one mentioned the silence. Their interest wasn't in me. It was in what I had. I served them tea with steady hands, though my heart was shaking. I listened as they spoke about reconnecting, about family bonds, about how we should all be closer now. I smiled politely, but inside, something was cracking open. I realized then that my absence had never mattered to them. Only my success did. As they sat in my living room, admiring what I had built without them, I understood something clearly for the first time. They hadn't come because they missed me. They had come because they discovered I was no longer invisible. And as I looked around my luxury home, the very space I had earned through years of loneliness and effort, I knew this visit was not a reunion. It was a test, and I was finally strong enough to decide how it would end. They stayed longer than I expected that first day, stretching their visit as if they had always belonged there. I watched them settle into my sofas, lean against my walls, laugh under my roof. Each sound echoed louder than it should have, stirring memories I had carefully locked away. I kept my posture straight, my expression calm, but inside me, 12 years of questions were demanding answers. They spoke about the past as if it had simply skipped a page. "Life moves so fast," one of them said casually. "Before you know it, years are gone." I nodded, though what I wanted to say was that years don't disappear on their own. People choose to walk away from them. As they talked, my mind wandered back to the years I spent alone. The evenings when I cooked for one, setting the table carefully, even though no one else would sit there. The holidays I spent pretending they were just another day. so the ache wouldn't grow too loud. I remembered the hospital visits when I sat by myself, signing forms with trembling hands, wishing anyone would show up. They never did. Now they were here, asking about my work, my investments, my plans. They praised my taste, my discipline, my success. Each compliment felt hollow, like applause arriving after the performance was long over. One of them finally asked the question I had been expecting, though I wished I hadn't. "You must be doing very well now," they said with a smile. "It's impressive. You've really made something of yourself." I smiled back, slow and measured. "I had to," I replied. "There was no one else to rely on." The room grew quiet for a moment. I saw something flicker across a few faces, discomfort, perhaps, or guilt. But it passed quickly. They changed the subject, laughing again, avoiding the truth hovering between us. That night, after they left, I sat alone in my living room. The house felt different, heavier, as if their presence had stirred dust that had long settled. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, grounding myself in the reality I had built. This place was my reward for survival, not an open invitation for those who had abandoned me. Over the next few weeks, they came back again. Sometimes unannounced, sometimes with small gifts, cheap gestures wrapped in bright paper. They spoke about making up for lost time, about visiting more often, about how families should stick together. Yet not once did anyone apologize. Not once did anyone acknowledge the 12-year absence for what it truly was. I began to notice patterns. They praised the house, then hinted at staying longer. They asked about my schedule, my travel plans, my finances. One relative joked about how perfect my home would be for family gatherings now. Another mentioned how nice it would be to have a place like this to escape on weekends. I listened carefully. I answered politely. And with each visit, my clarity sharpened. I realized they weren't rebuilding a relationship. They were testing boundaries. One afternoon, as we sat at the dining table, someone suggested we host a large family event at my place. "You have the space now," they said lightly. It makes sense. Something inside me settled, calm, firm. I looked around the table at faces that had not seen me cry, struggle, or age through hardship. Faces that had reappeared only when my life looked comfortable. "I didn't build this house to prove anything," I said quietly. "I built it to live in peace." They looked at me surprised. The room fell silent again, but this time, I didn't fill it with polite smiles or soft laughter. I let it remain. Later that evening, as I stood alone on my balcony watching the sun sink, I felt a strange mix of sadness and strength. Sadness for the family I thought I had lost forever. Strength for the woman I had become without them. I knew then that the next conversation would be the hardest one yet. Because kindness without boundaries had already cost me 12 years of invisibility, and I would not let it cost me my future too. The next time they came, I was ready, not with anger, not with rehearsed speeches, but with honesty I had earned the hard way. I had spent nights thinking, replaying every visit, every comment, every unspoken expectation. I realized something important. They weren't evil people, but they were comfortable forgetting me. And comfort, I learned, can be just as cruel as intention. They arrived in the afternoon, laughter filling the hallway before they even stepped inside. I offered tea, as I always did. Old habits die slowly. We sat together, and for a while, the conversation stayed light. Weather, travel, food. But beneath it all, there was tension, like a string pulled too tight. Finally, one of them said it. "We were thinking," they began carefully, "since you're alone here, maybe we could all spend more time together. You know, family again." I looked down at my cup, watching the steam rise and disappear. 12 years vanished the same way, quietly, without anyone noticing. "I was alone before too," I said gently. "You just didn't see it then." Their smiles faded. Someone shifted in their seat. Another cleared their throat. I continued, my voice steady but firm. For 12 years, I lived without invitations, without calls, without anyone asking if I was okay. I learned to celebrate myself, to grieve alone, to survive without leaning on family. That didn't happen overnight. It took everything I had. One of them tried to interrupt, to explain. "We didn't mean to, life got busy." "I know," I said, raising my hand calmly. "Life always gets busy, but love doesn't disappear unless we let it." The room went silent again, but this time it felt different. Heavier. More real. "I'm not angry," I said. And that surprised even me. I've moved past that. But I won't pretend those years didn't shape me. This house, this life, it wasn't built with support. It was built with loneliness, discipline, and self-respect. I stood up then, not to walk away, but to stand taller in my truth. You're welcome here as guests, I continued. Not as owners, not as dependents, and not as replacements for the years we lost. If we rebuild something, it has to start with honesty, not convenience. Some eyes dropped. Some faces hardened. A few looked genuinely ashamed. That was enough for me. They left earlier than usual that day. No laughter in the hallway. No casual promises. Just quiet footsteps and thoughtful expressions. When the door closed behind them, I didn't feel empty. I felt lighter. That night, I walked through my house again, but this time with peace. The walls no longer echoed with doubt. The rooms felt like mine again. I sat in my favorite chair, wrapped myself in a shawl, and allowed myself to cry, not from pain, but from release. I thought about the woman I was 12 years ago, waiting, hoping, making excuses for others. And I wished I could reach back through time and tell her this: you will be okay. Better than okay. You will build something no one can take from you. In the weeks that followed, the visits became fewer. Some family members stayed distant. A couple reached out quietly, trying to talk, not about the house, not about gatherings, but about the past. I chose my responses carefully. Not every door needed to be reopened. Not every wound needed to be touched again. What mattered was this: I was no longer invisible. I learned that family isn't defined by who shows up when your life looks impressive. It's defined by who stays when your life looks ordinary, messy, or broken. And if that kind of family doesn't exist, it's not a failure. It's an invitation to build something better within yourself. Today, when I sit in my living room and watch sunlight spill across the floor, I don't feel bitterness. I feel pride. Pride in my resilience. Pride in my boundaries. Pride in choosing dignity over desperation. They may have ignored me for 12 years. They may have shown up only when comfort was visible. But the most important truth is this: I showed up for myself every single day. And that is the kind of wealth no one can ever inherit, borrow, or take away.